Ranjan, you'll have to turn around, mate. We can't, if you're talking the other way, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Glenn Albrecht is a professor of sustainability at Murdoch University in Perth. He's an environmental philosopher with both theoretical and applied interests in the relationship between ecosystem and human health. He has pioneered the research domain of psychoterratic or earth-related mental health conditions with the concept of Solastalgia, or the lived experience of negative environmental change. He also has publications in the field of animal ethics and is currently researching the ethics of relocating endangered species in the face of climate change pressures. He publishes in peer-reviewed journals and has recently completed and published book chapters on his research interests. With colleagues Nick Higginbotham of University of Newcastle and Linda Connor of Sydney University, under Australian Research Council Discovery Project grants, he has researched the impact of mining in the upper Hunter region of New South Wales, and now the impact of climate change and communities, again in the Hunter region. Glenn has also been involved as a chief investigator in ARC Discovery Project research on the social and ethical aspects of the thoroughbred horse industry worldwide. Glenn Albrecht is a pioneer of transdisciplinary thinking, and with Higginbotham and Connor produced a major book on this topic. Health Social Science, a transdisciplinary and complexity perspective with Oxford University Press in 2001. His current major research interests the positive and negative psychological, emotional, and cultural relationships people have to place, and its transformation is one that sees him having an international research profile. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Dr. Albrecht.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was hoping that my seamless technology would enable me to see a screen image of my presentation in front of me, and that you would be able to see the identical thing behind me, and that I wouldn't need to turn around for a single moment. But of course, life doesn't work perfectly at all times. So I've got this beautiful image of a Newcastle triangle butterfly, which is my desktop image and screensaver on my laptop. But on the screen in front of you is the presentation. So all I have to do, hopefully, is just move things down and it will work. And if it doesn't, we're in trouble. So yeah, I've tried this once, and hopefully we'll be able to get it. So, as explained, I'm a philosopher whose job now is professor assistant. Don't worry about reading that, that's just the abstract that I sent. I'll put something different on there. You might be able to read that. I'm a professor of sustainability at Murdoch, which means I'm a professor of anything I care to be. Sustainability is a very broad topic. And I take seriously the idea that the social, the economic, the cultural, the biophysical are all part of what sustainability is all about. But as a philosopher, I've become interested in the relationship between the state of the environment and mental health, both positive and negative. So I grew up in Western Australia. I was born in Subiaco, so right back to my birthplace. I grew up in Manning, and there were kangaroos that bounced down Parsons Avenue in the mid-1950s. And lived long enough in Perth to see major transformations to the Perth metropolitan area and the Swan Coastal Plain. I then went to Newcastle in New South Wales and spent 27 years there as an academic at the University of Newcastle. Had two Novocastrians, otherwise known as children born in Newcastle. And then 3 years ago came back to Perth. Now I had been back and forth a few times. My mum still lives in Perth. In fact, I look after her in Jarrahdale. But I was really shocked when I returned to find that the city that I had grown up in and loved had turned into a 100-kilometre north-south conurbation, enveloping, smothering the whole of the Swan Coastal Plain, having devastating impacts on the Swan River. And many of the species that I was familiar with as a boy, as a bird-loving boy, had either disappeared or were very hard to find. So as a result, of my work in the Hunter Valley and my experiences, my endemic sense of place, which I call it, growing up in Western Australia, I've always been, my mental health, I think, has been closely tuned to the state of the environment. So in the Hunter Valley, coal mining was one of the big factors that influenced my thinking there. In WA and my return to my hometown and my home state, it's really this massive development pressure over very short periods of time on a scale and at a speed which is just unbelievable that's affected me. So, you know, I recently completed a book chapter. I had to try and explain how it is that I have these thoughts about place and identity, place and mental health. And I realised the only way to do this is to go back through my own history. And I had a bird-loving grandmother in Manjimup. My grandparents had a farm just out of Dean Mill. And so every opportunity I had, I was down in the bush, in the Karri forest, in the mixed Karri and Jarrah forest, enjoying the bird life, being educated by my grandmother and being able to do a lot of the things down there that enabled me to have a very strong endemic sense of place. My mum was an amateur botanist. She was a volunteer at Kings Park for many years, over 20 years. And so as a result of Thelma Edwards' influence on me, Glenn Albrecht, I've had a fantastic, I guess on the maternal side of my family, influence on my sense of place and my identity. On the male side of my mum's family, they're all log truck drivers, loggers, foresters, but they're all lovely. They all believe that forestry is sustainable. We have robust arguments about that, but nevertheless, it's the maternal side of my mother's family that gave me my strong endemic sense of place. So I'd encourage you, if you ever wonder why it is that you are interested in population and environment issues, do your own ecobiography and discover the own pathway that lead you to where you are now. What I'm going to do in this presentation is look at the state emblems, the floral and mammal emblems and other iconic WA identities that tell us something about what's happening to the state of Western Australia and in particular to the Swan Coastal Plain. So hopefully this thing will move now. All of you probably know already, and I'm not an ecologist or a botanist, so I won't dwell too much on the detail of the biological and the ecological, but Western Australia and the southwest in particular is a biodiversity hotspot. Its concentration of endemic species is one of the most intense in the world, particularly in the southwest. And so it quite rightly is one of the 28 biodiversity hotspots identified worldwide as having global significance. So we actually sit right in that hotspot, and the Swan Coastal Plain once, and hopefully still does have, a suite of endemic species that are obviously, by definition, not found anywhere else on Earth. But that also gives us a particular responsibility to look after and to appreciate those species. So in this red area there, more than 4,000 species of endemic plants. We're still discovering more on an annual basis. People like Steve Hopper, he only has to take a trip down to Albany and we've got another 50 or 100 species that go into the list. 100 endemic vertebrates have been recorded here, and so I can't convey to you just how special the place is from a biological, biophysical perspective. The Swan Coastal Plain itself is a hotspot, so we've got a large number of plant and animal species found nowhere else on Earth. So again, it's part of that southwest concentration. We just happen to have plonked ourselves on one of the most biologically intense diverse areas on the planet, and this is despite the fact that it's a Mediterranean climate with very dry summers and what used to be fairly wet winters, but most of you know that story. To give us some credit, we've tried in our planting processes to keep around about 10% of the original vegetation and landscape away from development. But from what I can tell, since I've been back, we've failed miserably on that, and I haven't been able to update those stats. But certainly in the growth corridors along the north-south axis of Perth, the freeway and the railway lines, there's a lot less than 10% of the landscape being preserved. And if it has been preserved, it's been preserved in tiny little islands, which then add up to the 10%. But of course, those islands, although precious, are not conducive to long-term evolution of species, nor their preservation and conservation. So we're already doing a lot with a population of 1.7 million. You can imagine what we're going to be doing if the projections for population for this southwest corner of Western Australia are actually realised. So, I mean, where we are is hopefully well known to all of you, your locals. The density are in the realm of the bleeding obvious. The closer we are to Perth and the major arterial axes and transport corridors, the denser the population. We're densifying, if that's a word that's acceptable, it seems to be nowadays. Infill, taking little chunks of vegetation that used to be part of the urban bushland landscape. I drove past one of them for the first time in 3 years on Thomas Road and discovered that one of my favourite patches of bush where I used to walk from the University of Western Australia into Kings Park on the other side of the road is gone. There's now a massive development there. So infill, loss of small but significant little micro biodiversity hotspots all have a massive impact on biodiversity in general. So we're right on top of something which is now under severe stress and pressure, not just because of human development pressure, but hopefully most of you would understand that climate change is manifesting itself in southwest WA more powerfully than just about anywhere else on Earth. Does that register in the newspaper or in the media in Perth? No. It's really strange. Now, I said, I grew up with kangaroos in Manning. Well, there aren't kangaroos in Manning anymore, but I live in peri-urban Perth, which is Jarrahdale now, 50 kilometres out. And there are heaps of kangaroos. It's lovely. And these kangaroos, although at the back you can't see the little brown balls in that picture, it's the kangaroo paddock at Byford. If you drive through Byford on the left-hand side, just before you leave, there are about a couple of hundred kangaroos that you can see at any time of the day. And so it's a wonderful experience. But they're retreating from that area too, because their paddock's about to be developed by some huge company, and it's going to become a Woolworths. There's a lot of dead roos around Byford and Jarrahdale because they're obviously in competition with humans and their cars. And we're seeing the retreat of the kangaroo. There is some good news though, because I've seen them reappearing in Perth. There's a lot more of them in Perth now than what I remember as a kid. They've got briefcases as well, which really impresses me that kangaroos are so adaptable that they can become part of our commercial world. So kangaroos with briefcases in St George's Terrace. I think the artist was actually telling us something about the story that I'm attempting to do in a slightly different way. I mean, I like the kangaroos, they're really nice, and I do remember those shish kebabs that went up in front of the council building and what a stir they caused, and there was some guy called Paul that created them. That's about all I can remember. Britain, maybe? Yeah. They're there, and I noticed the tourists go and touch them. There's people, they're bronzy, so they're touched so often that they're glowing. But yeah, real kangaroos, the story is slightly different. Black swans, we still have plenty of swans, so the state emblem with the kangaroo and the swan. The kangaroos disappearing. The swans, well, Vlaming thought that there were very large numbers of them on the Swan River when in 1697 he came through. If you do a trip down the Swan now, I'm not sure how many you see. I lived for a short time in Bigton, and there were swans there, but they would come around the big boats begging for food. So they're smart enough to figure out that if you're near humans, you can get a free feed. I noticed that the Swan River along the freeway is now showing signs of sea level rise. They're having to build a seawall right across it to stop the river from coming into the freeway. I've noticed too, the Sea Scouts Hall at the Canning Bridge end. My friends always used to sail their boats from there. Well, now the jetty's permanently underwater. So if you're around long enough, you can actually see the changes, visible changes in the landscape And one of the other changes is the loss of swans on that section of the river, because as it's become impounded and seawalled, the interface between the reeds and the trees and the whole system that kept out alive is disappearing. Plus you've got heat stress, boats and jet skis. And the other unusual thing about Western Australia is that we seem to hate our own animals. I mean, there's a company that I don't need to name that used the swan as a symbol of fear, and how it creates accidents and how we should insure ourselves against such accidents. And so we're actually learning, and children are learning to fear our own state bird emblem as part of the process of selling human insurance. That's really weird, and the only way you can explain it is by biophobia, that we're actually a culture now that is learning to hate, detest, and live in fear of our own biodiversity. I won't dwell too much on cute animals like numbats, except to say that they used to live in Jarrahdale, they used to live in the wheat belt. In fact, they used to live in a very large part of the whole of Australia. So their range was there. They're now located in a few tiny little places in the southwest of WA. The biggest concentration of them is in the southwest Loop, which is fantastic, but not really the place you want to see numbats forever. And what's threatened them is land clearing, introduced animals like foxes and cats, and they're extremely rare now. So, I mean, in any other country in the world, that species would be declared critically endangered. We're talking about a few thousand animals left in the wild. I don't know why they're not critically endangered in Australia. Our floral emblem, the kangaroo paw, fantastic plant. Its range is here in the southwest hotspot. You can see that on this map here it shows primary land use. The red area is the intensively used human use. Guess what? The range of the kangaroo paw and the range of human intensive use coincide. And so the kangaroo paw, although it's not rare at the moment, is exactly the kind of species that's lined up for long-term endangerment and ultimately extinction, because there is no space for the kangaroo paw to exist, given that its habitat is exactly the same habitat that humans prefer. So the most intensively used land of the southwest is also the most favoured land for this particular species. I have a particular love of parrots, so I'll tell you a quick story about parrots and then I'll move on. I used to love the red-capped parrots that were part of the landscape in Manning, St Lucia and Aquinas. They used to breed there, and I just had this long-term love of that particular bird. They too are not endangered in Western Australia, but their home territory, if you like, is from Geraldton through to the south coast and the whole of the southwest corner. So the biodiversity hotspot is their home, and particularly in the Jarrah Marri forest. And because they're particularly connected to the Marri, their bill or beak is perfectly adapted to extract seeds from the Marri nut. The more we lose Marri, the more we lose that bird. The more they adapt and start eating things like apples, the more we shoot them. There's one of the few parrots that there was a school permit available through the appropriate government agencies to shoot them. And so, even though the bird was very clever and thought, well, if you knock the Marri down and put up apple trees, we'll eat apples, we're still, in a sense, punishing them. So, as we lose Marri, Jarrah, the wetlands of the Swan Coastal Plain, of course we begin to lose the endemic species that are typical of our part of the southwest biodiversity hotspot. 80% of the wetlands on the Swan Perth Coastal Plain have been lost, and that's an indictment of our lack of planning, our lack of appreciation of biodiversity. One of the things that I've done in the Hunter region while I lived there for 27 years was to help create the Hunter Wetlands Trust, to build a wetlands centre in Newcastle and re-educate the whole population, particularly from the point of view of children, about the value of wetlands. So I know that that's happening in various places in Perth, but obviously we've got a big job to do. And I've also been part of the opposition to Road Highway, gave a passionate talk trying to channel John Septimus Roe, who would never have wanted a freeway to smash through a wetland in order to have a road that goes nowhere, particularly when road was responsible for the creation of Kings Park. That's a lovely jarrah tree that exists in a parking lot in the big shopping centre in Armidale. It's the last large jarrah on that part of the Swan Coastal Plain. And I don't, it's a wonder why they've kept it, but they've built everything around it, including the car parks, and it now sits in a little tomb-like space of its own. The map indicates the extent of jarrah. We're now seeing the disappearance of jarrah because of development on the Swan Coastal Plain, and also because of climate change. Mass tree death in this period of last year, particularly from about February through to May. Around Jarrahdale, at least 10% of the tree cover just simply died instantly over a 2-week period. My colleagues Giles Hardy and George Matusik at Murdoch are studying this carefully, so if you're not familiar with the mass tree death of 2011, you will soon, because if we don't get rain in this particular period of the cycle of the tree growth, we will also experience another mass tree death, and unfortunately it's going to just compound on top of it. Yep.
Sorry, what was the percentage of the tree deaths?
Around about 10% across the northern jarrah forest. 8.8% on an aerial survey was the exact figure, but around Jarrahdale it was even higher. I get my jarrah honey from the honey man on Jarrahdale Road. He's a lovely guy, and he said that although trees are flowering at the moment, there's no honey, and that's because the tree stress is still evident in the forest. So we're beginning to see the effects of this gradual decline in rainfall and runoff. Well, runoff is actually a dramatic decline in the Perth region. So that's what the forest looks like as it's dying around Jarrahdale. It's just a canopy which some of the older trees have died from dieback, but this time last year there was just an understory and a middle story of brown. It looked like autumn in Europe happening in Western Australia. Other retreating species, I can't take my mum for a drive through the back of Jandypot and places like that anymore, because she remembers the extent of the Nutsia floribunda, or Christmas trees there. Southgate and the shopping centres around that area were just a mass of orange during the summer period and the Christmas period in particular. So that and the chewit tree are pretty well coextensive with the Swan Coastal Plain. The development pressures on those two species mean that two of the iconic species that almost define what it's like to live in Perth in the Christmas time are disappearing. So it's a pretty grim story, and as a philosopher I'm interested in how do we cope and how do we understand this and cope with these kinds of pressures that are in the biophysical system. And Gregory Bateson, an interesting transdisciplinary thinker, had the same feeling around Lake Erie in the early 70s. And he could see Lake Erie being used as a repository for the waste of Canadian and North American, USA industrial processes. And he says, you decide you want to get rid of the byproducts of human life and that Lake Erie will be a good place to put them. You forget that the eco-mental system called Lake Erie is a part of your wider eco-mental system. And if Lake Erie is being driven insane, its insanity is incorporated into the larger system of your thought and experience. Well, in a sense, we all live in Lake Erie. Let's just ask the same question that Bateson argued about the swan. One of the reasons why I left Victon was that I was here during the period when the dolphins were dying in the river. It wasn't just the dolphins, the whole of the park area around Blackwall Reach had lost its native orchids and a whole lot of things that my mum and myself really appreciated. Some people like Tim Winton are totally in tune with this negative transformation which is taking place. He wrote an article in the West Australian where he was contrasting the summer nights that he'd spent as a kid in the Swan catching prawns and having a great time, which I certainly did myself. He says, today, algal blooms are commonplace, massive fish kills feature in the news, and dolphins covered in hideous lesions wash up amongst the shallows, wash up in the shallows. So I think, you know, we get signs like that that tell us that something's going wrong. But again, the media and general awareness of these issues is not great. So how do we get people tuned into what it is that we've got or had and still have? How do we tune people into the fact that we're losing these things? And because we're losing it, how do we convince them that it's important that we actually resist that process? How do we get this, how do we reverse this negative process? Well, one way I think is to understand the environment more intimately as part of your mental landscape. So although there's a landscape out there, the argument is that it's intimately connected to your interior landscape, and that if we're going to engage in landscape restoration, we're actually going to have to do it inside and out. As a philosopher, I'm starting with the mind. I take my hat off to people that are out there planting trees, although I'll do that myself as well. But somebody's got to start working on why it is that our consciousness is so badly out of kilter with the places where we live. So, sensescape is the shapes, touches, smells, sounds, colours of your environment. And you just absorb it. It's like osmosis. It's something that if you're born in a particular place, you just get it. My endemic sense of place is, you know, gum nuts, red-capped parrots, hairy marron, Christmas trees. I mean, there's a whole kangaroo paws. The shape of the kangaroo paw in flower is one of the most exquisite organic forms on the planet. And I'll go out of my way to find them. So that's me. That's what my head looks like. But I live in a place that looks like that. That's a sensescape as well. There are smells, there are colours, there are iconic images, there are reds. The reds are just as vivid as the red in the red-capped parrot. But that's a sense of place that you can have anywhere on the planet. What I'm trying to encourage people to see is a sense of place, an endemic sense of place, which is only to be had here. There's no reason why you can't have both. But at the moment, that one is obliterating the former. That one is global. The one that we have in southwest WA is unique in the true sense of the word unique and cannot be replicated in any other part of the world. Joni Mitchell, that great philosopher of place, had it right in 1970. And George Seddon, our own geographer at UWA, who wrote about sense of place much earlier than about the time I was becoming a revolting student at UWA, trying to figure out how to get out of science and into social protest movements. Mind you, we got free tertiary education and a few other good things, and we protested about the Vietnam War. But George at that time in the 70s and earlier was writing about the homogenising effects of international technology and production. And he was hoping that that would lead to a renewed concern for the local and the endemic. Well, it didn't happen, did it? As much as I love George Seddon's writings and their powerful, powerful writings, we have bulldozed our endemic sense of place and replaced it with a global sense of place. And what's more, most of us, and I'm not talking about people in this audience, most of us seem to actually like that. Now, that means we've got a tough turnaround. So, being a philosopher, I'm involved in a project which is to repair wounded places, and we do it by putting works of art in places that are damaged. That's a Banksia grandis grove in Jarrahdale that just died last year, the whole lot. So I stuck some red-tailed black cockatoos in there because the symbol of renewal is a bird for this project, and people do that all over the world. So I better keep going, otherwise I'll keep you too long. So being a thinker, I created two categories of thinking, psychoterratic and somaterratic. Somaterratic is about the environmental impacts on your body, your physiology and your anatomy. So if you're exposed to lead or some other toxin, it's a somaterratic environmental health problem. It's psychoterratic, psyche, the mind, terror, the earth. It's earth-related mental health conditions, both positive and negative. And so I realised that we didn't have these categories of thought and that we needed them if we were going to address the realm of the psychoterratic. I'm trying to put back into our language, particularly English, concepts that would, fine-tune our relationship to the earth through our emotions and our existential or conceptual states. So I'm trying to develop a richer typology of concepts that we can use to describe what's going wrong or what's going right, and apply them to our understanding of how the earth is working or not working at the moment. Positive states, hopefully, in your more optimistic moments. Endemophilia. Well, if you're into endemism like I am, then and philia is love of, then of course you're an endemophiliac. You didn't know it, but now you do. Biophilia, E.O. Wilson and others have made that term famous about an inbuilt love of biology and life. Ecophilia, take it and put it into the ecosystem. Topophilia is love of place and landscape. Solophilia is one that I've invented, which is the love of the whole, the solidarity that's needed between people to hold everything together. Eutierria is another one I've invented, which is just a shorter version of the idea of that oceanic feeling, that moment when you feel at one with everything, particularly surfers apparently feel it when they have the perfect wave. Well, I have it when I see the perfect kangaroo paw. And I have this moment of eutierria, which otherwise known as that oceanic feeling is too complex and too many words, so I've created one that's shorter. And so, as an academic, I'm working my way through all that. Solastalgia I created because of my experience in the Hunter Valley. The people living there next to open-cut coal mines, many square kilometres wide, half a kilometre deep, were experiencing direct threats to their loved home environment. And they were very emotional about their love of home and how it was being destroyed. And they realised that we didn't really have the appropriate terminology to describe this. So I created Solastalgia, which is about the loss of solace from your home environment in 2003. And if you put it into Google now, you'll find tens of thousands of people using the concept on a regular basis. That's the kind of landscape that produced Solastalgia in New South Wales. The bumper sticker version of that concept is the homesickness you have when you're still at home. I haven't got a shorter definition than that, but if your home environment is actually leaving you and you've remained rooted to the spot, you're likely to be experiencing solastalgia. It happens with mining, it can happen with land clearing. Climate change is more subtle because your climate's actually moving south at the rate of about 150 kilometres every 50 years in southwest WA. But we don't even know that. We don't even experience it firsthand. We wake up, if you're 50 years old, which I am and a bit more, and you're away for a while, you come back and realise this place is just radically transformed from what it was when I was a kid. It even rains from the north now, and in the summertime. That was unheard of. So it's a complex thing, but it comes from violation of the earth, a violation of your home, a violation of your sense of place, and an attack on your identity as a human being. And Dora, one of the people I interviewed, gave a perfect but emotionally agonising description of what solastalgia was really all about. She says, it wasn't just mental, it was also visceral. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and she clenched her fist and said, this is how I feel, I'm that knotted up. She says, she can't sell, what do? I was a real mess. And that for me was the start of this journey that I'm on to understand the psychoterratic. In Perth, I hope that we're beginning to have a renewed concern for the endemic, mainly because we've lost so much of it. We can't afford to lose any more. And this is not just about sheer numbers of population, it's about how and where we're living and our failure to actually put aside places for non-human beings. I mean, we're really good at looking after ourselves. But, for example, my solastalgia started when I came back to Perth and found the extension of the freeways, north and south, and the railway line. I mean, it's great that humans can move so quickly from one end of Perth to the other. But it's like building a Berlin Wall right down the middle of two sectors of Perth, the east and the west. And if you're not a human being, you're in serious trouble because you're going to get killed if you try and cross that Berlin Wall. And yet we don't think about it as a massive change to the biophysical landscape of Perth, and yet that's exactly what it is. So what we've got infill, we've got major development, we're losing iconic places, we're losing iconic species, and the endemic shapes and colours are disappearing and being replaced by these global signifiers of global development. And as I said, climate change is just crashing into all of that as well. So I won't go into these any further except to say that Richard Louvre, who's done us a great service by creating the term nature deficit disorder, is alerting us to the fact that our children are no longer tuned into nature because we don't allow them to experience it. So we have what, is kind of an amnesia here. Of course, our children don't understand what it is that some older environmentalists are passionate about, because their experience of the Perth environment is immeasurably impoverished compared to mine. They don't see, feel, smell, touch any of the things that I took for granted growing up in South Perth. So it's no wonder we're actually seeing a generational ignorance and generational apathy with respect to environmental issues. So some of us were onto that a long time ago. That's a loony cartoon from 1974. It wasn't called nature deficit disorder then, but quite clearly he was onto it. And again, I won't go into detail about how my psychoterratic typology gets into the details of anxiety and paralysis. It's too depressing, so I'll just skip that. Although I have to tell you, the most depressing painting ever painted was a psychoterratic painting. I don't know if you know, but Munch painted the screen in response to the explosion of Krakatoa. Krakatoa had produced this massive dust cloud that went right around the world and changed the sunsets everywhere and changed the climate for a number of years, if not decades, but particularly the sky. And people were freaked out by it, had no idea why all of a sudden their sunsets and sunrises, their sky environment had changed so rapidly. So the screen depicts the impact of Krakatoa as a psychoterratic syndrome. So just in case you just thought it was about general anxiety, it's not. It's anxiety about the very thing that I'm trying to talk to you about. So we clearly need some more solophilia. We need more of this feeling of solidarity between ourselves in order to do something on a collective basis to turn this big ship around. Solophilia, if you put that into Google, you'll maybe get a few thousand hits, probably 5 or 6. It's had nowhere near the interest in it that solastalgia has as a concept that I've created. But nevertheless, I'm here for the long haul. I reckon some solophilia of a major kind is just around the corner. So I'm an eternal optimist. So despite the gloominess of my presentation, I think we'll actually stir ourselves to A, become aware of the endemic, and B, to conserve and protect what remains of it. And not only that, but to love it, and also to see that our own psyches, our own identities, our own personalities are actually tied into being a Jarrah person, a Swan River person, a Maori person, a red-capped parrot person, or a kangaroo person. So, it might be a temporary victory, but there's just one place in WA where I know development has been stopped recently. There are some other examples where the development has been stopped, but not for landscape, environmental, biodiversity or psychoterratic reasons. It's to do with more complicated legal issues and other issues like land rights, which are all important. But this one was about terroir, preserving a landscape, maintaining a senscape, enabling people to continue to go to a place without it being transformed in a way that would be not only negative to the mental health of people there, but just totally inimical to the very idea of what Margaret River represents. Well, if we all live in Lake Erie, we can all live in Margaret River. It's just the flip side of a a drama or a dilemma that we're all part of right now. So I happen to love that part of the world. It connects closely to my Manjimup origins. I've got a lot of friends there. I do research there now. So having researched the Hunter Valley and discovered that my own mental health was being affected by the desolation that was going on, I decided when I would return to Western Australia that I'd actually start researching a place where the landscape was relatively intact and the people were very happy about their relationship to place. Well, it's my hope that we move the Solastalgia from the Margaret River area further north. I mean, they've obviously got something going there which is very powerful, and it's not just good red wine. There's more to it than that. It's a pattern or a template, if you like, as to how we can transform the negativity into something which is powerful and positive. So, we are already overpopulated in a gross physical sense. But the overpopulation is not often thought of as a social and psychological and cultural problem. I see it that way, and I don't think it's the whole story, but I think it's an important part of the story. And so our eco-cultural diversity depends on us fighting the forces of globalisation and homogeneity. And we're better on Earth to focus on an endemic sense of place in one of the most biodiverse hotspots on the planet, with some of the greatest levels of endemism of anywhere else on the planet as well. So I'll leave you with that positive thought.